Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take that huge mountain of global sources, the groundbreaking science, the really tense geopolitical stuff, and those big economic shifts, and boil it down.
Right. We try to give you the essential context you actually need to feel, well, properly informed.
Our mission really is to cut through all the noise out there and pull out the insights, maybe some surprising details you wouldn't catch otherwise.
And today, we're definitely navigating some pretty monumental topics. We've looked at sources talking about a big leap towards a unified theory of consciousness.
Which sounds huge.
It is. And then there's a catastrophic Category 5 hurricane threatening millions in the Caribbean, plus the AI arms race heating up with new players challenging the big guys.
Yeah. We've got everything from scientists using, believe it or not, household sugar to hunt for dark matter.
Still sounds amazing when you say it like that.
It does. And we also need to understand why something like a U.S. government shutdown immediately puts food assistance for, 40 million Americans at risk? It's a massive amount of info.
It really is. So let's unpack this and get right into the deep end of the data.
Okay, let's start out there with the cosmos. We've got this 60-year-old riddle about our own sun that's apparently been solved.
Yeah, this is the coronal heating problem. For decades, scientists have been puzzled by it.
Right, the sun's atmosphere, the corona, it's millions of degrees hotter than the actual surface, which seems backward.
It completely defies basic thermodynamics, yeah.
Yeah.
Hotter further away doesn't usually make sense.
So what changed? How did they figure this out?
Well, what's really fascinating is that the answer was actually predicted theoretically, like 6 decades ago. It just took this long for the technology to catch up and actually observe it.
Sorry.
Researchers used the Daniel K. NEA solar telescope. It's incredibly powerful. And they directly observed something called torsional alpha wind waves in the sun's corona.
Torsional alpha waves. Okay, let's break that down a bit. Are these like sound waves, heat waves? What exactly are we talking about?
No, they're magnetic oscillations. Think of the sun's really strong magnetic field lines stretching out into space, almost like giant invisible strings.
Okay.
These alpha waves are like these twisting high-energy ripples that travel along those magnetic field lines. They're the key.
Ripples on magnetic strings, so they carry energy.
Exactly. They're the energy transporters. It's now confirmed that they're funneling energy up from the cooler, lower layers of the sun's atmosphere into the superheated corona.
Huh. So the magnetic field isn't just structure, it's like an energy superhighway.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, they're the mechanism transferring enough energy way up high to create that extreme temperature difference.
Wow. So confirming a theory from 60 years ago, that's a big deal for solar physics.
Oh, absolutely. Monumental confirmation. But the practical side, the relevance for us here on Earth, is actually huge too.
All right, tell us about that. Better understanding of the sun usually means better space weather forecasts. But what does that actually mean for, people on the ground or specific industries? Is there a bottom line?
There absolutely is. It translates directly to protecting our infrastructure. When the sun has a solar flare or coronal mass ejection, it can send a blast of charged particles towards Earth.
Geomagnetic storms, right. Space weather.
Exactly. And right now, our prediction models are okay. But they often lack the detailed physics needed to really nail the intensity and, importantly, the direction of these storms.
So better models using this alpha and wave understanding
Means we can prepare much better. Utilities, for instance, can take steps to protect power grids from surges. Satellite operators can maneuver valuable assets out of harm's way.
Okay, that makes sense.
And even industries you might not think of, like finance. They rely heavily on GPS for precise timing to synchronize transactions. Getting advance warning of a disruption can prevent potentially billions of dollars in losses or errors.
So solving a theoretical cosmic mystery from the 60s ultimately helps keep the lights on and maybe prevents financial chaos down here.
That really is the essence of why fundamental science research matters, yeah. It connects in ways you don't always expect.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so from the sun, the most visible thing in the sky, let's pivot to maybe the most invisible thing in the universe, dark matter.
Right. And the latest tool scientists are trying to use to detect it is, well, it's almost comically common.
This is the sweet project you mentioned, using sugar. I mean, it sounds like something from a science fiction spoof, but our sources confirm this. Scientists are using regular household sucrose crystals. How on earth does that work?
Yeah, it's called sweet. This stands for Sugar Weighing and Emitting Electron Technology. It's a real project. And it works because it takes a totally different approach than traditional detectors.
How so? What do traditional detectors use?
Typically, they use these huge vats filled with very heavy materials, like liquid xenon. They're designed to look for relatively heavy, dark matter particles, causing a significant interaction, high-energy stuff.
Okay, heavy detectors for heavy particles. Makes sense.
But SWEET flips that. It focuses on detecting light, dark matter particles.
Ah, okay. And sugar helps with that.
Exactly. The innovation is in the material itself. Sucrose, table sugar, C12H2211 is packed with hydrogen atoms.
Right. Lots of H in C12H2211.
And the hydrogen nucleus is incredibly light. That makes it super sensitive to potential interactions with very low-mass dark matter candidates. We're talking specifically about a type of wimpy, draggy, weakly interacting massive particle that might just zip right through those heavy xenon detectors without leaving a trace.
That's completely counterintuitive. You'd think bigger, heavier tools are always better for detection, but here the lightness is the key advantage.
It is, because we're looking for these really faint, low-energy interactions from potentially very light particles. It's actually brilliant because, frankly, we don't know the mass of dark matter particles yet.
Yeah.
We probably need lots of different kinds of detectors looking across the whole mass range.
Okay, so the hydrogen in sugar is sensitive, but how do they actually detect an interaction if it happens? It must be incredibly subtle.
It is incredibly subtle. The method involves cooling these pure sugar crystals way, way down to cryogenic temperatures, near absolute zero. Then if a WIMP, one of these light dark matter particles, happens to bump into the nucleus of an atom within that supercooled crystal lattice, it transfers a tiny bit of kinetic energy.
And they can measure that tiny bump.
They try to measure it in two distinct ways simultaneously, which is key to filtering out background noise. First, the interaction creates phonons.
Phonons, like sound.
Kind of, yeah. Think of it as a quantum of vibrational energy rippling through the crystal lattice. It's like the crystal hearing the impact.
Okay, so a sound signal. What's the second way?
The interaction also generates a tiny flash of light called coupled scintillation light. So the crystal effectively sees the interaction too.
Ah, so they need both a sight and a sound at the same time from the same spot?
Precisely. By requiring that coincidence, seeing the flash and hearing the vibration together, they can massively reduce the false positives from background radiation or other random events that plague these kinds of experiments. It helps them isolate a potential real signal from these ultra-low energy WIMP interactions.
Cooling everyday sugar down to almost absolute zero to listen for the ghostly whisper of invisible matter passing through. That's just poetry in physics.
It really highlights the creativity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The ingenuity happening in experimental physics right now is pretty amazing.
It really is. Okay, let's shift gears again, moving from the invisible universe to maybe the deepest mystery inside us, consciousness itself. Our sources mentioned a potentially major leap here.
Yes, this is potentially very significant work aiming towards a unified theory of consciousness, which, as you said, is kind of the ultimate mystery.
So what was the specific breakthrough, and what theories are they trying to bring together? Because there are quite a few out there, right?
There are. This recent work focuses on trying to reconcile two of the leading, but often seen as conflicting, theories. One is integrated information theory, or IIT.
IIT, what's the core idea there?
IoT basically proposes that consciousness arises from the complexity and the level of integration of information within a system. So the more interconnected and complex the information processing, the higher the degree of consciousness.
Okay, complexity and integration. And the other theory?
That's global workspace theory, or GWT. GWT suggests consciousness is more about information being broadcast widely across the brain, like becoming available on a global bulletin board, so that multiple specialized brain areas can access and use it.
So IIT is about how interconnected the information is, and GWT is about how widely accessible it is. They sound different. How did researchers bridge that?
Well, they developed a sophisticated computational model suggesting that consciousness isn't just one or the other, but actually requires both things happening simultaneously. High levels of local information integration and efficient global broadcasting of that integrated information.
Okay, the model suggests you need both. Did they test this experimentally?
They did. They mapped electrical activity in human brains while people were doing different kinds of tasks, some requiring focused attention and conscious processing, others more automatic and unconscious.
And what did the brain scans show?
They found that during those moments of conscious processing, specific brain regions entered this temporary high-power state where information was indeed both highly integrated, locally satisfying the IIT condition and at the same time being effectively broadcast across other key areas, meeting the GWT requirement. Unconscious processing didn't show that same dual signature.
Huh. That actually feels intuitively right somehow. But moving towards a unified, maybe even quantifiable definition of consciousness, what are the real-world implications? They must be massive.
Oh, profound. I mean, think about medicine first. If we could actually measure the degree of consciousness, we could potentially diagnose conditions like locked-in syndrome or differentiate between vegetative and minimally conscious states much more accurately, moving beyond just observing behavior to using actual quantifiable brain metrics.
That would be huge for patients and families.
Absolutely. And then there's artificial intelligence. A unified theory could give AI developers a kind of theoretical roadmap if they wanted to try and build genuinely conscious machines, not just systems that mimic consciousness.
Which opens up a whole universe of ethical questions, doesn't it?
A massive ethical minefield. What are we actually building? When does a machine cross that line from sophisticated simulation to potentially having genuine awareness, subjective experience? This kind of research forces us to confront those questions head on.
Wow. Okay, from the sun to dark matter to the nature of mind itself, let's bring things down to earth now, literally, to the soil beneath our feet, which is, just as critical for our survival.
Right, and we have a couple of really interesting findings here related to sustainable agriculture. First up, researchers now apparently have the first large-scale, direct empirical evidence showing that organic fertilizers actually outperform conventional synthetic fertilizers.
Outperform how? In terms of yield? Because the common narrative for a long time has been that organic is maybe better for the environment, but you take a hit on yield, you need more land.
That's exactly the narrative this research challenges. It found that organic methods lead to significant improvements in long-term soil health and more reliable crop yields over time compared to conventional methods.
Okay, reliable yields over time. What's the mechanism? How does organic achieve that?
It really boils down to microbial diversity and soil structure. Organic fertilizers, things like compost and manure, provide complex carbon sources that feed a much wider variety of beneficial microbes in the soil compared to just dumping synthetic nitrogen.
So healthier soil life.
Exactly. This thriving microbial ecosystem leads to better nutrient retention. The soil holds on to things like nitrogen and water more effectively, and it also significantly improves the soil's ability to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Basically, the soil becomes a healthier, more resilient, self-regulating system.
Which translates to more stable yields, especially maybe under stress conditions like drought.
Precisely. It's not just about a single bumper crop in one year, but more resilient, reliable production year after year. This really shifts the debate, moving organic from maybe a niche or philosophical choice towards a data-driven argument for wider commercial adoption based on long-term performance and resilience.
That's a significant finding. You mentioned a second point on agriculture.
Yes, moving to the perhaps the luxury end of farming, wine grapes. French scientists are developing innovative, eco-friendly solutions for vineyards.
Wine is notoriously chemical intensive, right? Especially with fungicides.
Extremely. But these researchers are working on microalgae-based fungicides to reduce that heavy reliance on chemical pesticides.
Microalgae, like pond scum, basically. How does that work as a fungicide?
It's pretty clever ecological chemistry. Certain compounds produced naturally by specific types of microalgae have been found to disrupt the cell walls of common fungi that plague vineyards, things like powdery mildew.
So it offers protection without the synthetic chemical residue.
That's the goal. And this aligns perfectly with the huge and rapidly growing consumer demand, especially in places like Europe and North America, for organic and sustainable wines. People are increasingly willing to pay more for products they perceive as healthier and better for the environment.
So it's an ecological win that could also be a major market advantage, potentially revolutionizing high-value wine production while reducing chemical runoff.
Exactly. A really smart application of ecological principles to a high-stakes industry.
Okay, let's move from the fields and the frontiers of science to the world of silicon and software. The AI arms race, as you mentioned earlier, seems to be just accelerating. And we just saw a huge player, mostly known for mobile chips, make a direct play for the data center market that NVIDIA really dominates.
Yeah, Qualcomm stepping into the ring is a big deal. They've launched these new chips, the AI 200 and AI 250, and they're aimed squarely at data centers. This is a clear shot across the bow at NVIDIA and also Advanced Micro Devices, or AMD.
Right. NVIDIA's dominance, especially with their GPUs and the CUDA software ecosystem, It seems almost unshakable in AI right now. Why are investors suddenly so bullish on Qualcomm? Their stock jumped, what, over 20%?
Yeah, the investor confidence is huge.
Hmm.
And it seems to be based primarily on Qualcomm's traditional strength, power efficiency.
Ah, okay. Not just raw speed, but doing more with less power.
Exactly. See, NVIDIA's chips, like their flagship H100, they offer incredible raw processing power, which is absolutely necessary for training these enormous foundational AI models from scratch.
Right, they're really heavy lifting.
But Qualcomm comes from the mobile world, where power consumption is everything. They specialize in highly efficient, often more specialized AI accelerators, like their Hexagon Digital Signal Processor or DSP architecture.
So they're not necessarily trying to beat NVIDIA at training the biggest models head-to-head. Where's their angle?
Their strategic opening appears to be more in AI inference. That's the stage where you're actually running the already trained models to get results, make predictions, generate text, whatever, and also potentially in specialized model fine-tuning.
Okay, running the models uses less power than training them.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
And for data centers running these AI applications constantly, electricity costs are a massive operational expense. If Qualcomm can genuinely offer, say, 80% of the performance for a specific inference task, but at only half the power consumption of an NVIDIA chip,
That becomes a very attractive proposition, especially at scale.
a huge proposition for cloud providers like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, and for large enterprises running their own AI. Qualcomm is essentially leveraging a different architectural philosophy, hyper-efficiency, to carve out a niche against NVIDIA's more general purpose, power-hungry dominance. It's a smart strategic move.
That focus on power efficiency definitely seems like a key battleground in this next phase of the AI race. And speaking of the massive demand driving all this, we're seeing some truly astronomical valuations for AI startups, even for companies that aren't building the core models themselves.
Yeah, the story of Mercor is a perfect example of that. They're a startup, and what they do is essentially solve the last mile problem in AI training.
The last mile. What does that mean in this context?
It means connecting the big AI labs, the Googles, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, building these huge foundational models with highly specialized domain experts. Think like a geologist who understands rock formations, or a lawyer specializing in maritime law, or someone fluent in a rare language.
Ah, so they're basically matchmakers, ensuring the AI models get trained on accurate, niche, real-world knowledge, not just scraping the general internet.
Precisely. Because it turns out that human expertise, that specialized knowledge, is often the bottleneck right now. You can have all the computing power in the world, but the models are only as good as the data they're trained on, especially for specialized tasks.
And Mercor facilitates getting that high-quality, expert-vetted data into the training pipeline.
Exactly. And the market value placed on that service is just stunning. Mercer's just closed a $350 million Series C funding round. That funding round quintupled their valuation to $10 billion.
$10 billion for essentially a platform connecting experts to AI labs.
$10 billion. It just underscores the absolutely intense, almost desperate demand right now for services that can provide accurate, specialized, reliable human guidance and data for training these foundational AI models. It shows how critical that human element still is.
Wow. Okay, switching gears slightly from AI hardware and training to how we prove who we are in the digital world. Looks like digital IDs are finally starting to hit the mainstream, at least in the US, but with a pretty significant catch.
Yeah, we're seeing definite steps towards digital identity becoming more practical. Apple announced that digital versions of U.S. passport information will soon be integrated into their wallet application on iPhones.
Okay, so you can have your passport info on your phone. What can you actually do with it?
The initial rollout allows users to present this digital ID at select Transportation Security Administration. That's the TSA checkpoints for domestic air travel within the U.S. The idea is it could potentially streamline the whole airport security process quite a bit.
That sounds incredibly convenient. Does this mean, finally, I can leave my physical passport book safely locked away at home when I'm flying domestically?
And that is the crucial point. No, unfortunately not yet for all travel. This is the big limitation everyone needs to remember. This Digital ID in the Apple Wallet will not be sufficient for international travel.
Ah, okay. Only domestic flights within the U.S.
Correct. When you're crossing international borders, global regulatory bodies and border control agencies in other countries have much stricter requirements. They still absolutely require the physical government-issued passport book with all its security features.
Got it. So convenient for getting through TSA screening for a flight from, say, New York to Los Angeles, but absolutely useless if you're flying from New York to London.
Exactly. It's a digital solution designed for a specific, closed-loop domestic system. The TSA process, not a replacement for the global standard of the physical passport for international border crossing.
Yeah.
That distinction is critical.
Okay, let's transition now into the often complex and sometimes dangerous world of global geopolitics. Our sources are highlighting some serious strategic moves, ongoing conflicts, and also this worrying trend of hybrid threats, particularly in Europe.
Yeah, we really have to start with Russia and a significant display of their nuclear capability. They successfully tested the Burevestnik cruise missile.
Burevestnik, that's the one NATO calls Skyfall, right?
That's the one. And this isn't just any conventional missile. It's nuclear-powered.
Nuclear-powered cruise missile. Okay, what makes that so strategically different or, frankly, worrying, besides the nuclear aspect itself?
Well, Russian officials have made some pretty extraordinary claims about this weapon. They allege that because it's nuclear-powered, it has an effectively unlimited range.
Unlimited range.
Right. That's the claim. And they also say it's designed to be essentially invulnerable to existing air and missile defense systems, maybe by flying unpredictable low-altitude routes.
Wow. If those claims are even partially true, that represents a potentially game-changing strategic threat, doesn't it? It bypasses traditional range limitations.
It absolutely does. It would significantly bolster Russia's nuclear deterrence posture by suggesting they could potentially hold any target on the globe at risk, launching from unexpected directions or maintaining patrol for extended periods.
A claim like that, even if it's partly aspirational or propaganda, requires a serious response from the U.S., I imagine. How did President Trump react to this test?
President Trump definitely acknowledged the seriousness of it. Yeah. He stated publicly that the U.S. is not only closely monitoring Russia's testing, but is also fully prepared to respond. He even hinted at making some strategic adjustments, possibly involving the positioning of U.S. nuclear submarines, maybe moving them closer to areas where Russian subs patrol.
So, a signal of deterrence in return.
Yes, but he also used the moment to criticize President Putin directly. He essentially said that Putin should be focusing less on testing these kinds of aggressive new weapons and more on finding a way to end the conflict in Ukraine, which has now been going on for nearly 4 years.
And this kind of military posturing seems to be happening alongside moves that signal a real breakdown in trust, particularly around arms control agreements.
Absolutely. In a related move, Russia formally pulled out of a key U.S.-Russia treaty from the year 2000. This was an agreement concerning the safe disposal of 34 metric tons of weapons-grade plutonium.
Plutonium disposal. That sounds pretty important. What was the treaty supposed to do?
The goal was to ensure that this highly dangerous military material, surplus from the Cold War, was verifiably converted into a form that couldn't be easily used for weapons again, like mixed oxide or MOX fuel for nuclear reactors.
And Russia just walked away from that.
President Putin signed the decree terminating Russia's participation. The official reasons cited were fundamental changes in circumstances and ongoing U.S. sanctions against Russia.
Pulling out of an agreement designed specifically for safely managing weapons-grade plutonium? That sends a really concerning message about non-proliferation and the general state of diplomatic relations, doesn't it?
It's deeply concerning to arms control experts, yes. It suggests that many of the diplomatic guardrails and verification mechanisms built up over decades to manage nuclear risks are being rapidly dismantled. The trust required for such agreements seems to have evaporated.
And meanwhile, the rhetoric around the ongoing Ukraine conflict remains incredibly harsh, blocking diplomatic paths.
Extremely harsh. For instance, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov recently accused European leaders and the Ukrainian government itself of actively sabotaging any potential for meaningful diplomatic talks between Moscow and Washington regarding the conflict.
And his language describing the Ukrainian government was particularly inflammatory, wasn't it?
It was. He publicly characterized the government in Kyiv that came to power after 2014 as, and this is his term, a Nazi regime. He claimed this regime is attempting to essentially exterminate Russian culture within Ukraine and undermine the rights of Russian speakers, treating them, again in his words, as second-class citizens.
That's obviously extremely strong and controversial language.
It is, and it's really important for our listeners to understand that this is the narrative Moscow consistently uses to frame its actions, this idea of protecting minority rights and responding to perceived threats to Russian identity. Western governments, of course, view these claims as completely unfounded justifications for military aggression. We're reporting the specific language used here because it illustrates the depth of the diplomatic breakdown and the fundamentally different ways the conflict is being framed.
Understood. Okay, shifting focus geographically now to the Middle East. There's an incredibly delicate humanitarian effort underway in the Gaza Strip, tied to a recent ceasefire agreement.
Yes, this involves teams from the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, and also Egyptian personnel. They've been granted limited but crucial access to search in areas just beyond what's known as the Yellow Line.
The Yellow Line, that's the zone controlled by Israeli forces.
Generally, yes. They're being allowed to go slightly beyond that line into areas heavily damaged during recent fighting, specifically to try and recover the remains of hostages who were killed and whose bodies are believed to be trapped under collapsed buildings and rubble.
A grim task. And this access is part of a formal agreement.
It is. It aligns directly with the terms of the recent U.S.-brokered ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas.
Can you remind us of the specific terms of that exchange related to remains? It really underscores the human tragedy involved.
The agreement stipulates that Hamas is obligated to locate and return the remains of all deceased Israeli hostages. In return for each set of Israeli remains recovered and returned, Israel has agreed to return the bodies of 15 Palestinians killed during the conflict.
15 Palestinian bodies for each Israeli hostage recovered.
Yes. It's a stark reflection of the often grim and complex realities of humanitarian negotiations during intense conflict. The recovery of remains becomes a critical, though deeply painful, element in providing some measure of closure for grieving families on all sides.
A very difficult situation. Okay, let's move back to Europe now. We're seeing a NATO member state, Lithuania, taking some pretty drastic actions against what it's calling a hybrid threat.
That's right. Lithuania is responding very forcefully to what it perceives as deliberate destabilization tactics coming from its neighbor, Belarus. The Lithuanian Prime Minister announced plans to indefinitely close border crossings with Belarus.
Indefinitely closing border crossings, that's a major step, shutting down vital transport and trade links. What specifically triggered this?
The immediate catalyst seems to have been repeated disruptions to air traffic, primarily at Vilnius International Airport, but also affecting Kaunas Airport as well. These disruptions were caused by balloons.
Balloons, like weather balloons?
No, these are suspected smuggling balloons, likely launched from Belarus. The belief is they're being used to carry contraband, probably large quantities of untaxed cigarettes, across the border into Lithuania and thus into the European Union single market.
Okay, smuggling is a problem, but closing borders and calling it a hybrid threat seems like a strong reaction just for cigarette smuggling.
It does, but Lithuania's framing elevates it far beyond simple organized crime. The key is the impact and the perceived intent.
Oh, so?
The Prime Minister explicitly authorized Lithuanian border guards to shoot down these balloons. More significantly, she characterized these balloon incursions not just as smuggling, but as deliberate hybrid attacks designed to intentionally disrupt critical national infrastructure, specifically international airports.
Ah, so the effect shutting down airports repeatedly is seen as the primary goal, more than just the contraband itself?
That seems to be the interpretation, yes. And because of that perceived intent to destabilize and disrupt, the Prime Minister even suggested that these activities might warrant invoking Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty, the NATO treaty.
Article 4. That sounds serious. For listeners who might not be familiar with NATO's articles, what does invoking Article 4 actually entail? Is it like Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause?
No, it's different and significantly less escalatory than Article 5. Article 4 doesn't trigger an automatic military response. What Article 4 does is state that NATO member countries will consult together whenever, in the opinion of any of them, their territorial integrity, political independence, or security is threatened.
So it's basically a mechanism to call a formal meeting, raise an urgent security concern with all the allies.
Exactly. By suggesting Article 4 might be relevant here, Lithuania is signaling to its allies and to Belarus that it views these balloon incidents as a serious threat to its security, potentially requiring a collective political response or coordinated defensive measures from the alliance. It's a way of highlighting how seemingly low-tech, non-military means, like balloons carrying cigarettes, can be weaponized in modern geopolitical conflict, what's often termed hybrid warfare.
A fascinating example of that gray zone conflict. Okay, finally in this section, let's turn to South America, specifically Argentina, where there's been a significant political development with clear links back to U.S. politics.
Yes, we saw the far-right leader, Javier Milei, achieve a pretty substantial victory in Argentina's midterm elections. His bloc secured just over 40%, 40.84% to be precise, of the votes for the lower house of Congress.
Over 40%. While not an outright majority, that's a significant share, right? Especially for a leader with such radical libertarian views.
Very significant. It considerably strengthens his position and his ability to push his often quite radical economic and social agenda within the Argentine legislature, even as a minority force. It gives him a much stronger platform.
And this electoral success was almost immediately followed by a major promise of financial support from the United States.
That's the direct link, yes. Following Milei's strong showing, U.S. President Trump made a public promise of a potential $40 billion financial bailout package for Argentina.
$40 billion. Argentina's economy has been in crisis for years. That would be huge.
Absolutely massive. The proposed package apparently includes measures desperately needed to stabilize the country's collapsing currency, the peso, such as a $20 billion currency swap arrangement.
But there's a catch, right? It's not a done deal.
Precisely. The crucial element here is that President Trump explicitly stated this potential $40 billion aid package is contingent upon Milei's continued electoral success and, significantly, his subsequent political performance and policy alignment.
So it's essentially using the lure of a massive financial rescue package as leverage, tying it directly to the political fortunes and policy choices of a specific leader in another country.
That's exactly how it appears. It highlights a very direct, high-stakes form of diplomatic engagement where major financial aid is explicitly linked to ideological alignment and specific political outcomes, heavily influenced by the domestic political landscape within the United States itself.
Okay, let's bring our focus back to domestic issues now, particularly in the U.S. The government shutdown we mentioned earlier is continuing, and the real-world human impact is becoming starkly and immediately clear. It seems to be hitting the most vulnerable people first and hardest.
Yes, the situation is definitely escalating beyond just federal employees missing their paychecks, although that's serious enough. The most critical and, frankly, alarming development is the official announcement regarding the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, better known as SNAP.
SNAP, that's the program formerly known as food stamps, right? Assists low-income families with buying groceries.
Exactly, and the announcement is that all federal funding for SNAP, which currently helps feed over 40 million Americans, will completely stop on November 1st if the shutdown isn't resolved.
November 1st. That's incredibly soon. We're talking about potentially widespread hunger and food insecurity hitting millions of families just weeks before major holidays like Thanksgiving. Why does SNAP funding run out so quickly compared to, say, Social Security or other entitlement programs that seem more insulated?
That's a really important question, and it highlights a key structural difference that often gets lost in the political back and forth. Unlike programs like Social Security or Medicare, which are funded through dedicated trust funds built up over time.
Right, they have reserves.
Exactly. SNA, however, operates entirely on annual appropriations. It relies completely on Congress passing a funding bill each year to keep it going. There's no large trust fund reserve to draw from during a funding gap.
So when Congress fails to pass a budget or a continuing resolution, like in the current shutdown, the money allocated for SNAP for that period literally just runs out.
It runs out almost immediately.
Yeah.
The well goes dry, so to speak. That's why the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which administers SNAP, was forced to make that stark announcement about the November 1st cutoff. The funding mechanism itself creates this immediate crisis cliff, rather than a slower decline, putting immense pressure on families and, theoretically, on Congress to act.
It really throws the catastrophic, real-world consequences of political gridlock into sharp relief. Millions facing potential hunger because of a failure to pass basic funding bills.
Absolutely. And while vulnerable families are facing this kind of immediate existential threat, we're also seeing, in a stark contrast, major corporate battles being waged over government attempts to mandate more transparency, specifically around climate change.
Right. This is the corporate climate showdown you mentioned. ExxonMobil suing the state of California.
That's the one. California recently passed new laws requiring large corporations doing business in the state to publicly disclose detailed information about their greenhouse gas emissions across their whole supply chain, and also to report on their financial risks related to climate change.
So, laws aimed squarely at corporate accountability and giving investors and the public a clearer picture of climate impact and risk.
Exactly. But ExxonMobil is fighting back, and their legal argument is based on the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the right to free speech.
Free speech. How does requiring disclosure relate to free speech?
Exxon's argument is that these mandatory disclosure laws violate their free speech rights by compelling them to speak. They claim that being forced to disclose this specific internal data in the way California requires might actually convey what Exxon considers to be potentially misleading statements about their environmental impact or their future business prospects related to climate change.
Huh. So they're framing transparency not as accountability, but as potentially compelled misleading speech by the company itself. That's a interesting legal angle.
It's a significant legal challenge. They argue the state is essentially forcing them to adopt the state's messaging on climate change through these disclosures.
What would be the broader impact if ExxonMobil were actually successful with this argument? If the courts agreed that mandatory climate disclosure violates corporate free speech?
It could have a profound chilling effect, potentially nationwide or even globally. If this legal theory holds, it would set a precedent making it incredibly difficult for other states, or even the federal government like the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, to implement similar mandatory climate reporting rules.
It would essentially shield corporations from having to reveal potentially damaging information about their climate footprint under the guise of protecting their speech rights.
That's the concern, yes. It creates a direct conflict between the growing public and investor demand for accurate, standardized data on climate risks and corporate contributions, and the desire of some companies to control the narrative around their own environmental performance and liabilities. It's a major battle over corporate transparency.
Definitely one to watch. Okay, now let's turn to a situation where the link between climate change and immediate disaster is being drawn very explicitly by scientists. Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean.
Yes, Hurricane Melissa intensified with frightening speed into a catastrophic Category 5 storm. We're talking sustained winds exceeding 157 miles per hour, which is the threshold for Category 5.
Terrific. That's the absolute top of the scale. Where is it heading?
The forecast track, as of our latest sources, poses an extremely grave threat, particularly to Jamaica. Some projections suggest it could potentially become the strongest hurricane ever recorded to make landfall on the island. It's truly an existential threat scenario for parts of Jamaica.
The potential humanitarian crisis sounds immense, not just for Jamaica, but across the region.
It's staggering. Estimates suggest around 1.6 million children are considered at immediate high risk across the main islands, likely to be impacted. That includes Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic.
Have evacuations started?
Yes. Mandatory evacuation orders have already been issued for many low-lying coastal areas in Jamaica, including historically significant places like Port Royal, which has been devastated by storms and earthquakes before, and also Old Harbor Bay. Storm surge is a massive concern. With a storm this powerful, it's often the biggest killer.
And you mentioned meteorologists are linking this kind of intensity to climate change.
Yes, U.S. meteorologists covering the storm are drawing a clear line, stating that the increasing intensity and frequency of major hurricanes like Melissa in the Atlantic Basin are consistent with the predicted impacts of human-caused climate change, particularly warmer ocean temperatures which fuel these storms.
And that scientific assessment is immediately feeding into political demands from the region.
Directly. This devastating storm has spurred Jamaica's Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, to make urgent public calls for significantly enhanced climate financing from wealthier, industrialized nations.
The argument being that islands like Jamaica are suffering the worst impacts while having contributed the least to the problem.
Precisely. He's framing it as an issue of climate justice, arguing that small island developing states are bearing the overwhelming brunt of climate change, damages storms, sea level rise, coral bleaching, despite having tiny carbon footprints compared to major economies. This terrible storm becomes Exhibit A in his demand for the promised, but largely undelivered, climate finance from richer countries to help vulnerable nations adapt and recover.
A stark connection between a specific weather event and those huge global climate policy debates. Okay, finally in this section, we had several really surprising health-related insights in our sources, some alarming, but also one offering potentially tremendous hope. Let's start with the hopeful one.
Yeah, this one is potentially huge. It involves the mRNA technology, the same platform used for the highly effective COVID-19 vaccines developed by Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna.
Okay, the mRNA vaccines. What's the new finding?
New research presented just recently at a major oncology conference, the European Society for Medical Oncology Congress, showed a truly stunning result in patients with advanced lung cancer.
What was the result?
Patients in the study who received an mRNA COVID-19 vaccine before they started standard immunotherapy treatment saw their median overall survival nearly double.
Wait, double? From what to what?
It went from 20.6 months in the control group, immunotherapy alone, to 37.3 months in the group that got the mRNA vaccine first. A massive difference.
Hold on. The COVID vaccine, designed to prevent a respiratory virus, acted as a powerful treatment booster for advanced lung cancer. That seems completely unexpected. How could that possibly work?
The leading hypothesis is fascinating. It suggests that the mRNA vaccine, which is designed specifically to provoke a very strong and broad immune response, particularly activating T cells against the coronavirus spike protein.
Right, it wakes up the immune system.
Exactly. It essentially puts the entire immune system on high alert, makes it hypervigilant. Then, when the patient subsequently receives the standard cancer immunotherapy, which works by helping the immune system recognize and attack cancer cells.
That already supercharged immune system does a much better job.
That seems to be the idea. The vaccine acts as a kind of non-specific immune primer, or adjuvant, making the subsequent cancer-specific immunotherapy far more effective. It's like the vaccine clears the fog, allowing the immunotherapy to see and attack the cancer much more aggressively.
So, potentially using existing widely available mRNA vaccines as a sort of universal immune booster before other cancer treatments.
That's the tantalizing possibility this raises. It suggests mRNA technology could potentially become a relatively cheap, safe, rapidly deployable, off-the-shelf adjunct to existing cancer therapies, applicable across different cancer types, perhaps.
The fact that it nearly doubled median survival in this lung cancer trial is just incredible. Obviously, needs more research, right?
Oh, absolutely. Massive amounts of further research and large clinical trials are needed to confirm this, understand the mechanisms better, and figure out optimal timing and usage. But as a preliminary finding, it's incredibly promising and a stunning example of how innovations in one field, vaccine development, can have completely unexpected benefits in another, like oncology.
Truly an unexpected solution potentially hiding in plain sight. Amazing. Okay, now for the more alarming health news you mentioned. A concerning mystery emerging in the U.S. Midwest.
Yes, this concerns the U.S. Corn Belt region, specifically focusing on the state of Iowa. Reports are highlighting a really troubling and currently unexplained rise in cancer rates, particularly among younger adults, people under 50.
Rising cancer rates in younger people is always a major red flag. Are there any suspected causes?
Environmental groups in the region are raising serious alarms and pointing fingers towards potential links with agricultural practices. Specifically, they're concerned about long-term exposure to agricultural toxins, such as nitrates from fertilizers and various pesticides, which are known to contaminate soil and, critically, drinking water sources throughout the Corn Belt due to agricultural runoff.
That link between intensive industrial agriculture and potential public health impacts, especially via water quality, is a recurring concern, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The situation in Iowa has prompted urgent calls from these groups and some public health advocates for much stricter standards for drinking water quality, particularly regarding agricultural chemical contaminants.
Is the implication that current regulations haven't kept pace with the sheer volume and types of chemicals used in modern farming?
That's certainly the argument being made, that the regulatory systems designed decades ago to protect public health from these kinds of environmental hazards may no longer be adequate, given the intensity and chemical reliance of modern, large-scale agriculture, potentially leading to the kind of negative health outcomes like rising cancer rates in younger populations that are now being observed. Yeah. It's a situation demanding urgent investigation.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, and one last quick health note. This one apparently reverses decades of medical advice about childhood allergies.
Yes, a significant shift in official medical guidelines regarding peanut allergies. The new recommendation is actually to introduce peanuts and peanut-containing foods to babies much earlier than previously advised, potentially as early as 6 months of age, depending on the infant's risk factors for allergy.
6 months? That's a complete turnaround, right? For years, the advice was to delay introducing allergenic foods like peanuts.
Complete turnaround. The previous advice, based on older theories, was indeed to delay exposure, often until age 3 or later. However, large clinical trials in recent years have shown convincingly that this strategy was likely counterproductive.
How so?
The new evidence strongly suggests that introducing peanuts early during that critical window when the infant immune system is developing, actually helps the body learn to tolerate peanuts and significantly reduces the risk of developing a peanut allergy later in life. The old advice, delaying exposure, may have inadvertently contributed to the dramatic rise we've seen in peanut allergy prevalence over the past few decades.
Wow. So proactive early introduction is now seen as protective, not risky. That's a major change for parents and pediatricians.
A huge shift in practice, based on much better scientific evidence.
All right, let's wrap things up today by looking at a few items reflecting the broader political and social context, starting with a situation in the United Kingdom that seems to be a pretty stark example of government mismanagement.
Yes, this concerns a really scathing report published by a cross-party committee of UK members of Parliament, or MPs. It heavily criticized the UK Home Office, that's a government department responsible for immigration and security.
What was the criticism about?
The report accused the Home Office of, and I quote, squandering billions of pounds of taxpayer money on using hotels to accommodate asylum seekers. The MPs described the whole approach as highly ineffective and characterized by chronic systemic failure.
Squandering billions is strong language. Billions on hotel rooms. What specific problems did the report identify? How did they waste so much money?
The MPs pointed to things like flawed contracts with private hotel providers and generally incompetent delivery of the program. It seems the contracts were often poorly negotiated, perhaps rushed, lacked clear performance standards or cost controls, and didn't adequately account for the fluctuating number of asylum seekers needing accommodation or their specific needs.
So, essentially paying premium rates for hotel rooms on a crisis footing without a proper long-term strategy or oversight.
That appears to be the core finding. The government ended up relying heavily on expensive, short-term hotel placements at inflated prices, leading to enormous financial waste without actually solving the underlying need for suitable, cost-effective long-term accommodation.
Beyond the huge financial cost to the taxpayer, what's the human cost of this kind of mismanagement for the asylum seekers stuck in the system?
It creates immense instability, uncertainty, and potential trauma for people who are already vulnerable. Asylum seekers are often housed in hotels that might be geographically isolated, far from legal aid, healthcare, or community support networks. They can be kept in this limbo state for prolonged periods, sometimes in conditions that aren't really suitable for long-term living, especially for families with children.
So the systemic failure isn't just about wasted money, it's also a failure to provide basic stability, dignity, and efficient processing for people seeking protection.
Exactly. The report suggests it reflects poorly on the government's fundamental capacity to manage complex logistical and humanitarian challenges effectively and humanely.
Okay, turning now to something quite different. The symbolism embedded in architecture, specifically presidential buildings. Our sources picked up on a comparison being made.
Yes, this was an interesting discussion contrasting two very different architectural acts by national leaders, both laden with political symbolism. On one side, you had the decision under President Trump to demolish part of the White House East Wing.
Right, I remember that. How was that framed symbolically?
Well, interpretations varied, of course, but it was often seen by commentators as a physical manifestation of his political agenda, a kind of disruption of established norms, perhaps an attempt to streamline operations or remove vestiges of previous administrations, a statement about breaking with tradition, maybe?
Okay, an active removal or reorganization symbolizing change. And what was the contrast?
A contrast was drawn with the massive building project undertaken by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the construction of the huge presidential complex in Ankara, often called the White Palace or Aksaray in Turkish.
That palace is famously enormous and opulent, right?
Incredibly so. It has over 1,000 rooms, cost hundreds of millions, possibly billions of dollars, and its construction was highly controversial, partly because it was built on protected forest land. Symbolically, it's widely interpreted as a powerful statement of centralized authority, national pride, and perhaps personal power, projecting an image of strength and permanence.
So while the Trump action involved altering an existing structure, maybe symbolizing disruption, Erdogan's involved building something entirely new and massive, symbolizing consolidated power.
That's the essence of the comparison. Both leaders used architecture either through demolition or construction as a very visible, nonverbal way to communicate messages about their leadership style, their relationship with tradition, and the nature of the state they lead. It highlights how buildings themselves can be potent political symbols.
Interesting comparison. Okay, finally, we had a really unexpected anecdote surface about a moment of surprising political unity, or at least institutional courtesy, between two figures usually seen as polar opposites in U.S. politics.
Yes, this was quite a fascinating little story. It came from Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna. She recounted an experience she had while traveling abroad with a bipartisan congressional delegation.
Okay, what did she claim happened?
She claimed that during a meeting, a European diplomat was being quite critical, perhaps disrespectful, towards President Trump. And according to Luna, it was actually Democrat Congresswoman Ilhan Omar who stepped in and passionately defended President Trump, or at least the office of the presidency, against the diplomat's criticism. Luna described the diplomat as being, quote, a jerk, and said Omar essentially told him off.
Ilhan Omar defending Donald Trump. Considering their extremely sharp and public disagreements on practically every domestic policy issue, that is remarkable, if true.
It is quite remarkable, which is why Luna highlighted it.
What does this anecdote, if accurate, tell us about the often blurry lines of partisanship, especially when U.S. politicians are operating overseas?
Luna's interpretation, and perhaps the broader takeaway, is that despite the incredibly deep, often bitter political divisions back home, there can still exist an underlying sense of institutional loyalty or respect for the office of the U.S. president when American politicians are representing the country on the world stage.
So, a sort of politics stops at the water's edge principle, even between staunch opponents.
Potentially, yes. It suggests that when faced with criticism from foreign officials, there might be an instinct among U.S. political figures, regardless of party, to close ranks to some degree and project a unified front, upholding the dignity of the American presidency as an institution, even if they fundamentally oppose the individual currently holding that office.
It highlights that complex, sometimes contradictory relationship between fierce partisan opposition domestically and a shared sense of national or institutional identity when interacting with the rest of the world. A subtle distinction that definitely gets lost in the daily political shouting matches.
Exactly. A small anecdote, but perhaps revealing about those underlying dynamics.
Well, we have certainly covered a huge amount of ground today. We've really dived deep into everything from attempts to unify theories of consciousness,
all the way to the immediate, terrifying reality of a Category 5 hurricane bearing down on Jamaica and other Caribbean islands.
Right. And thinking about the takeaways, what really stands out is the power of unexpected connections and cross-disciplinary thinking.
Absolutely. We saw how common household sugar, cooled down to near absolute zero in the SWEET project, might become a key tool for hunting the universe's most elusive matter. That's pretty wild.
It really is.
And maybe even more strikingly, the potential for mRNA vaccine technology developed for fighting a pandemic virus to possibly double survival times for patients with advanced lung cancer. That's a profound potential crossover.
Yeah, alongside those incredible scientific frontiers, we also got some crucial context on pressing global issues. Understanding exactly what NATO's Article 4 entails when we talk about hybrid attacks in the Baltics, or knowing the specific structural reasons why S&P food assistance funding disappears almost overnight during a U.S. government shutdown.
That kind of context is essential for moving beyond just headlines to real comprehension.
Exactly. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to chew on.
If it turns out that one of the next big breakthroughs in cancer treatment was hiding inside a technology designed to prevent viral infections,
Yeah.
and if maybe the most sensitive detector for the lightest forms of dark matter ends up being made of crystallized sugar,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder, what other radical, game-changing solutions to our biggest problems might be currently overlooked, simply because we tend to search for answers only within the narrow confines of traditional scientific or political disciplines? What happens when we start connecting the dots in truly unexpected ways?
The power of looking at the familiar, the obvious even, in a completely new light, something to think about. Until next time, stay curious and stay well-informed.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.